Welcome to our episode of the Global Investors Podcast. I'm your host, Charles Carillo. Today we have Marshall Sykes. He was raised in a real estate development family and began building houses and apartments as a teenager. He is now a partner in over 2,000 multifamily units while also managing a single family rental portfolio. Additionally, he has achieved success in investing in oil, gas, tech, startups, and other private equity opportunities. Marshall is a retired U.S. Navy captain with 24 years in the Civil Engineer Corps while leading billion-dollar global projects at ExxonMobil. So Marshall, thank you so much for coming on the show today.
Charles, thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
So you started in real estate as you're brought up in it, but can you give us a little background on yourself during those times, like a little bit of your personal family background and how you got introduced to real estate investing?
Yeah, well, my mom and dad built houses basically after my dad retired from the Army. He wanted to kind of start his own business, and he knew that passive investing in real estate was a good way to grow his net worth. And so he started doing that, and they were builders. My mom and dad both would build two houses at a time. They'd sell one to live off of and then keep one as a rental. So they kept their portfolio that way. As a teenager, I was one of 8 kids. I have 7 brothers and sisters, and we all at some point kind of worked on the properties. But I used to do that as a teenager, so I learned it. I didn't really like it. Very hot in North Carolina in the summers, but all the same, it kind of something in the back of my mind that I could remember later in life how we could create a house like that and have passive income the rest of your life.
That's pretty powerful. My dad got involved with buying D-class, let's say C- class apartment buildings where I'm originally from in Connecticut. And he self-managed them. He got it up to like 100 units, him and a partner. And I hated going to those places. It was like in elementary school and middle school. It was terrible. He had me collecting rent in elementary school, like collecting it, bringing back the receipts. But it was something that as years and years go by and you start looking back at kind of what it affords you, which is the passive income or semi-passive income, let's just say, and everything else, you find out how powerful of an asset class it was, even, and kind of it just, just some of these things that you might not like, I think, as younger. And then you find out kind of what the whole point of it later on that you don't really see as a younger person. That's kind of what happened with me.
Right. You don't know what's going on the next day. I mean, you're doing that hour's worth of work or whatever. You don't really see the big picture, like you're saying,
Yeah, that's it. Big picture. Yeah. You don't see the big picture until you get a little older, and then you're like, look back and you go, oh, wow, that's now I see what he's got going on here. So kind of moving forward, what was your professional background? You were in the Navy, Corps. What happened where you went into, that pushed you back into investing in real estate yourself?
Yeah. So I got an engineering degree at NC State University in Raleigh, and then went into the Navy as a civil engineer corps officer and did construction management in the Navy. So I guess I got busy with my military career. I had invested a little bit in the stock market, realized that the stock market really hadn't gone up a lot. I think I invested $25,000, and about 10 years later, it was still $25,000. And I thought, well, this is not really a good way to invest. And so I realized I can rely and leverage my family resources that want to help me get into rental income. And so I reached out to my brother, who was a builder at the time, and him and I would go into business together and build. He would build the house, and I would provide cash, I guess. So I got into the business that way by just starting and owning rental properties, single family homes, basically.
So what kind of brought you to kind of what you're doing now, and what is your current investment strategy where we stand right now for you and your company?
Yeah. So after I did my full Navy career, retired as a captain, and then I went and worked at ExxonMobil, for my second career, I was really interested in multifamily investing, and I've always been interested in apartments. In fact, one of the things we built when I was a teenager was a 4-plex with my mom and dad. So I got a little exposure in apartments then. And I always looked at some of the bigger properties, bigger multifamily properties, especially in California when I was later in my career. And I thought, wouldn't it be nice to own that much of a property to have in passive investing? I didn't realize you could actually do that through syndications. And so I got familiar with that maybe 6 or 7 years ago. And realized that you could pull your money together from individual investors and invest together as a syndication to buy apartments like this. So I did a few of those. And I started, after Exxon, I started working I formed my own company to do some of these. But when I first started, I was like, okay, I want to mentor, I want to help and I realized I really didn't want to run the property. I liked reconnecting with old colleagues and doing some of the capital raising. So I'd really have morphed my business into just being a fund manager and raising capital for other sponsors. My superpower, I guess, is networking and getting in and to understand the partners that are very structured and very successful. And so that's where I've been doing lately. I've been networking with those kind of folks. And in fact, I decided to kind of pivot a little bit and start working in oil and gas investments. So I've raised currently for an oil and gas investment, and I've done that in the past as well. Been very successful with those.
What was kind of your reasoning behind going into, let's say, multifamily investing from single family? What were some of the pros and cons that maybe you found between those two?
Yeah, I think I had a rough portfolio of around 10 single family homes at the time. But I realized that it's a very long process, and I had owned them for 20 years. And so a long process to get to a point where you're actually cash flowing a lot, at least in the ones I was in. And so it was a hard market, I guess I was in, as the rental prices weren't really increasing a lot. So you kind of have to understand that when you start investing, is how much the rental prices can go up or not. So I kind of got a little frustrated with that. I was making, 2 or 3% return on investment of our capital that was in. And I realized that we could probably do the projections for multifamily are much more than that. So I started looking at multifamily, and the first few that I invested in are very successful and had a lot more, return on capital for that.
That makes sense. When you're working with partners and reviewing them, whether it's passively investing with them, or if you're also a general partner with them, how are you vetting your sponsors when you're doing your networking?
Yeah, I think originally I was involved in a multifamily investment group, and so we were working with someone who had done this over and over again. So we were very well connected as a group and the sponsor. So I understood that part of it. I think the risk on that we probably didn't all see was that the interest rate was going to spike so high 3 or 4 years ago that it just spiked really fast over a 1 year period that no one had ever kind of across the industry never anticipated, and nor has it had it happen in the history before. So that kind of put a lot of people in bind. In fact, it was very hard. We had a lot of properties in distress for that reason. So that's the part I did not get involved in. So I started focusing more on that. If I got involved in a real estate deal, I would really understand the lending terms, because I wasn't involved in that at all in my original ones. So when I start looking at something to raise capital for, whether it's oil and gas or a pre-IPO company or a real estate deal, I start with the sponsor for sure, because the sponsor risk or operational risk is very big. And then you have to look at the market risk that you're in. Those are the big three that I look at. But the sponsor they have to be somebody who's very structured and has been in business a long time and can overcome any kind of challenges, because you're going to have challenges in any investment.
Yeah, it makes perfect sense. When you're doing, multifamily investing, you came from like the single family investing part of the business, so it's different, but it's still the same kind of concept, right? Renting out properties residentially. When you're going into oil and gas, that's kind of like a whole new ball of wax there. And like, how does that work in regards to? How do you vet that? You can vet out that operator and know that they've had successful past projects, let's say, but how are you really getting in and vetting an actual deal? Or do you just leave that because you vetted so much that operator?
Well, part of it, I guess part of the reason I got into oil and gas was I knew the sponsor pretty well and trusted them. But also I'd worked a better part of a decade in the oil and gas business, so I understood that part of it a little bit at least. But so oil and gas investing is similar. I mean, we do it through syndications as well, so it's similar to multifamily syndications. But when I vet them, I'm relying a lot on the sponsor. But I looked at their track record in oil and gas investments, and they had multi-year track record and multi-leases of success. And so it had been a long period of 40 years success on this particular operator who had done this over and over and over again. So I was able to rely on their track record. But also we also had video conferences and asked questions to the some technical questions on the oil and gas aspects of the plays as well.
Nice. Okay.
Do you have money sitting in the stock market and you're worried about it? Or worse, you have money sitting at the bank, not keeping up with inflation? My name is Charles Carillo, founder and managing partner of Harborside Partners. And since 2006, I've been investing my money and my family's money into income-producing properties. These are real assets, real properties with real addresses that produce real cash flow. At Harborside Partners, we provide passive investors who love real estate with a turnkey investing solution. If you want to put your money to work in real estate but can't find deals, don't have the time to get funding, and the last thing that productive people want to do is manage real estate. We find the deals, we fund the deals, and we manage the tenants, the termites, and the properties. Partner with us at investwithharborside.com. That's investwithharborside.com. Go to investwithharborside.com. If you love real estate, you like the idea of passive income, and believe that income-producing properties will appreciate over time, go to investwithharborside.com. That's investwithharborside.com.
As a passive investor, active investor, what are some of the lessons that you've probably learned over the years that probably stick with you the most? Whereas if you're raising money from people, if you're vetting operators, whatever it might be, what are some of the biggest lessons that you've probably learned in this space?
I think one of the biggest lessons I've learned is you got to really kind of test the waters a little bit with the sponsor to make sure that they can handle questions and are not frustrated by questions that you ask them, because you want somebody who's going to be honest with you and walk you through the process. So you want to test the sponsor. I like that as a understanding. I think some of the other things is when I look at my investor relations piece and I talk to a prospective investor, some of these investments just aren't a good fit. So one thing I like is finding somebody who has the risk tolerance to do an investment like this. It is not, they can't be just always nervous about the money. They've got to realize that it's an investment, there's risk. And so you don't want somebody who's always nervous. They're just not a good fit for this from themselves or for you as your investment. It's, you want a team that's all excited and all that, but they need to be aligned on the long-term prospects of having an investment.
Yeah, no, I think that's very responsible on the end of the syndicator, because I think a lot of syndicators, when they're trying to make that deadline, they'll take money from anyone, which is a huge mistake. But the thing though, as I found, is that you'll have conversations with people like an investor that reached out to me this week, and they had a time frame of 1 to 3 years for their investment, for buying multifamily. I mean, it just doesn't work. You know what I mean? It's not. I mean, and they're like, well, refinance or a sale. And you're like, that's even riskier. I mean, how do you penciling in refinances are extremely risky. I mean, a lot of these numbers that people reach on these pro formas, just as a side note here, I mean, a lot of it's pushed by having this refinance or them doing some sort of, for lack of a better word, like trickery with the exit cap rate. You know what I mean? Where they're like, it's down here a little bit, it's a little down here. Now we hit the number. You know what I mean?
Yeah, you really have to look at those two things in particular, because those do change the pro forma a lot. So you do want to know that. But yeah, an investor has to be able to realize this is an illiquid investment, and your capital is going to be tied up for years. You cannot. This is not a good investment for 1 to 3 years. Or most of these syndications just aren't. They just really aren't that kind of, because it can always drag into 6 to 7 years, even.
Yeah, we usually say I think it's 5 to 7 years. You know what I mean? Obviously we're shooting for 3 to 5, but it's 5 to 7. I mean, that's what we're getting debt for. You know what I mean? It's just like one of those things, especially now, if you have something that was bought in 2022, you know what I mean? You know what I mean? You're probably holding that off just to make sure you have rents start coming up again and, you know, really start getting some of that return. And you're probably underwater at some point right now. If it's not run correctly to the best, but or if your numbers were really off on rent assumptions. But either way, it's just, I think it's telling investors, like, maybe in a nice way, no, or maybe this, you know, doesn't fit with kind of what you're doing, or however you want to word it, is, I think, more powerful, because it takes then just a lot of, you know, it takes a lot of weight off your shoulders. Because if you took someone on like that, everything's going to run exactly how you're saying it to fit into what they want. And it just doesn't work like that. And then you're going to have calls every month with the same investor going over the same things once they get the report. You know what I mean?
A lot of people look at pro forma and they think this is what's going to happen. But pro forma is just a projection. You know, it's not. Once the contract's signed, things change in a lot of different ways. And so it could be positive or negative, but things change. And that's one thing that's going to be guaranteed. There is going to be change from the pro forma.
Yeah. That's one of the reasons why when you're looking at any of these numbers from a seasoned operator, they're going to have hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars in reserve. And that's for stuff that you didn't know when you do your due diligence, right? So, I mean, that's just like, it just goes to show you how unknowns they've left at the property, which you can't know everything. You know what I mean? When you can do a very thorough due diligence and check those boxes, but there's always going to be things that, you know, that you weren't aware of, or stuff that comes up, you know what I mean? And you have to make sure that you get those fixed, because you're taking on, not only, you know, are you buying that property, say with 100 doors or whatever it is. I mean, you have 100 contracts with those tenants that you have to take care of too. You know what I mean? So if something goes wrong, they owe you money every month, but you also have to provide your service back to them. And if AC start going out and stuff like this, you know, you know what I'm saying? You got to get those taken care of, or you're going to be breaking contracts. You're going to have a lot of unhappy people, a lot of issues. So it's a lot of responsibility you take on when you buy a multifamily property.
It really is. There's so many different factors that could happen. So you want to go with a sponsor that has been there and done that and has a great track record, because there are a lot of things that they've probably come across that they weren't aware of early on in their career, but now they are. And they're able to think through those and react to them faster than a new sponsor. When
you're, maybe if being a passive investor, or you're talking to a passive investor, maybe at one of your networking events you might have, how would you explain someone to, let's just talk multifamily, to best stress test the deal itself? You've reviewed the Syndicator. What are the things, high level, you would look at in a deal, or suggest someone else look at a deal before passively investing? I think you want to know a little bit about the industry and how it works, not just outside of the deal. So you want to understand that part of it a little bit, but you also want to understand where they're investing, especially like in multifamily property. You want to understand the market that they're investing in. In fact, I have 3 different properties that I've invested in the Atlanta metro. Well, if you know anything about Atlanta, it's made up of 5 different counties. And every one of those counties controls things a little differently with their property, which I didn't quite understand. But you want to understand that as a sponsor, and as a passive investor, you want the sponsor to understand those kind of things. When they're going, I wouldn't, like if they go to a new market, there's going to be some hiccups probably, unless they have somebody on their team that's been in that market before. Yeah, that's a lot of great advice, because the thing is, I found is if I'm passively investing, and I use as an example, they've got 1,000 units there, they've got 5 deals there or 6 deals there. This is their 7th deal. They have a system that works, and they're really just like plugging this new property in, and all the guesswork's been done, all the trial and error and all that stuff has already been done for the most part. Obviously, it's a new property. But the thing is that they have contractors in place. They have a management company, obviously, that works. They've gone through 5 or 6 properties with them. At that point, you're really, you're just kind of coasting in right behind what the sponsor's already doing. And that's what I feel is one of the best kind of situations. I don't want to be the first one in a new market, and I also don't want to be their only one in that market. You know what I'm saying? It's just, that's kind of how I found it to be most successful, because you want to partner with someone that has the experience, right? You're going to bring the money, they're going to have the experience and the team and the know-how, and those couple things kind of check off when they have other assets there.
Yeah, it makes a big difference in the returns and the health of the property and all that, because you want a team that's been there, done that, has the contractors lined up to do the construction or renovations or maintenance, has the property management team on staff. All those things make a big difference. Yes.
And the one thing you're talking about with Atlanta, which is an interesting example, is that for years after COVID, they had issues, and every county had different backlogs of what was happening with evictions and stuff like that. So if you're a listener, you're wondering how could it differ one county to the next? It's because they might have a lot more evictions that were backlogged from whatever it might be, or they might be slower working through them. As you're being an investor in that county, now it's going to be much harder for your property managers and for the GPs to really right side, or let's say initially stabilize the property, right? Get people out that aren't a good fit for the property and get new people in. That's going to take a lot longer. And that's where this pro forma gets messed up a little bit.
Exactly. I think evictions was the big lessons learned there. Because some counties just would not evict, and the tenants, unfortunately, the residents understood that. And so they played the game some. And then you have a big backlog, or you have a lot of people, a big percentage of people not paying rents, and then you don't have income. And then you can't pay your staff or your contractors and all that. So then, yeah, that really hurts the property.
Yeah. And it's just the beginning to the end when that happens. But the thing though is that when you have that good team, that's where it comes in, because if you have a really good eviction attorney that your team is utilizing, that your property managers are using as well, they'll tell you exactly what's happening because they're doing this all day long, and they'll assist you. So it all comes back to that GP, the team, and all these different things kind of work hand in hand to making it for a successful investment, which I've found over the years.
That's why it's important to go with a sponsor has that track record, has the longevity, so that they can, because they've come across it, they built the relationships with the attorneys or the property managers, and they know how to handle situations a little bit better.
Yeah. So Marshall, I mean, so many years you've been involved with investing in real estate. I mean, talking to people that are past investors, that were active investors, being both yourself, what are some of the common mistakes, I guess you would see real estate investors make that are common to maybe repeated by people that are beginners or maybe even experienced investors?
I think a lot of it is assuming things, or you're assuming certain things. Like, for example, I've saw some pro formas for multifamily properties that assume that contingency is only going to be 5% or maybe even 10%. I like to have a little bit bigger contingency in there than that. I know the numbers don't work out as well in the end, but you don't lose the property either, or you don't have so much stress in the property if you have a little more contingency. So things like that.
Yeah. I think the other thing too is like vacancies. When people are going in and they're doing a value add at vacancies at 5%, or the brokers are doing it, and it's just like, it just drives me insane, because it's like, I don't know where you're getting this number from, because it's just, there's no way you can keep this at 5% with doing all the stuff that you have to do in such a short period of time. You know what I mean? Right.
So you got to verify the numbers. So you'll see. And I guess one thing that I've heard about the brokers when they're advertising a property, and you're looking at it as a potential buyer, is you got to remember it's a marketing campaign for them. It's not necessarily, I'm not saying they're lying, but it's the best it could possibly be. You got to realize it's going to be a little bit less than that in most cases.
Yeah. I was selling a property a couple of years back, and they sent me a copy of the pro forma, and I was like, what in the world? Where is this guy getting this rent increases from? And I didn't ask him, but I was just talking to my partner about it. And it is what it is, but it's just like anybody in their right mind. I mean, just like I'm the person trying to sell the property, and I'm looking at it and saying it's incredibly insane. But the thing though is that this is where they're pulling it. They're pulling it from some like county number or something that's not even close to where they are. They're not like going on Zillow or something and finding what my neighbor's renting the property for, you know? So anyway, it's just How they do it, I don't know. But so, I mean, you were an investor for many years. You had a full-time job. You started investing again, starting in single family or into multifamily. What would be your advice to aspiring real estate investors? Maybe that already, they have something going on. They already have a W-2. Maybe they want to invest on the side. Maybe they don't know if they want to go active or passive.
I think, you get educated. There's a lot of stuff on YouTube, but then you got to go past that at some point and join a mentoring group or a mentor and have somebody help you understand it and walk you through. Maybe you assist somebody else for a year or two so you understand how they're doing it. So you make less mistakes that way on your own dime, I guess. And make sure you have contingency too. You got to have not just contingency in money, but you got to have, if you want to turn a property around, you're not going to do it in 3 months or 6 months. It may not in every case. You need a little bit more leeway on that. So you want to just have a lot more give and take, I guess.
I think if you're going into a property or a new investor and people are already, I'll talk to new investors in the last meeting, and it's like, get longer debt, get it fixed, get a reserve fund, you know what I mean? All these things you put together, you're going to be able to, and make sure you're able to hold. If you can hold a property for 10 years, you can keep it going. The chances of losing money are very, very slim. You know what I mean?
You don't want to lose money. Yeah. You want to do what you can and put into place so you don't lose money. Those are the things you want to do.
Yeah. So I think those are some of the things that I've learned over the years when I talk to new investors is really just, and I think the other thing too is that when people are always talking about investing, another thing that drives me insane is they're just talking about the down payment. There's no after I close, because there's buying and there's owning real estate. You know what I mean? Owning/managing. And now you need to have that reserve fund. You need to have funds available for doing work at the property, for fixing stuff up. You know what I mean? And that's kind of stuff that's not talked about. It's all about, how do I get the 25% or 20%? You know what I mean? And that's it.
Yeah. So there's a lot of ins and outs in your day to day and your forecasting that you've got to be prepared for. And that's what you're talking about there.
So Marshall, overall your decades of being a real estate investor, being a professional engineer and all sorts, what are kind of some of the factors you think that have contributed to your success over the years?
Well, part of it is just showing up every day and doing the work, being disciplined about things. I mean, I learned a lot about that in the military. I learned a lot about that growing up with one of eight kids, and my dad was retired Army. So I learned a lot about that and teamwork. You always, and just communication with people. You can communicate the bad news and the good news. So you got to be ready to do both, because you will encounter both at some point. So communication, discipline, showing up to work every day.
A lot of great information. So Marshall, how can our listeners learn more about you and your business?
Well, they can always reach out to me on LinkedIn and DM me there and kind of connect with me there. But also I have a free resource on various types of syndications they can invest in. It's called, you can go to investwiththecaptain.com and find that resource.
Okay, awesome. We will put those links all in the show notes. So thank you so much for coming on the show today, and looking forward to connecting with you here in the near future.
Thanks, Charles, for having me. It's been a pleasure today.
Thank you. Hi, guys. It's Charles from the Global Investors Podcast. I hope you enjoyed the show. If you're interested in getting involved with real estate, but you don't know where to begin, set up a free 30-minute strategy call with me at schedulecharles.com. That's schedulecharles.com. Thank you.
Nothing in this episode should be considered specific, personal, or professional advice. Any investment opportunities mentioned on this podcast are limited to accredited investors. Any investments will only be made with proper disclosure, subscription documentation, and are subject to all applicable laws. Please consult an appropriate tax, legal, real estate, financial, or business professional for individualized advice. Opinions of guests are their own. Information is not guaranteed. All investment strategies have the potential for profit or loss. The host is operating on behalf of Syndication Superstars, LLC exclusively.